You're listening to a podcast of Master Your Finances with me, Kurt Baker, a certified financial planner professional. Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. on 1077thebronx.com. Another edition of Master Your Finances presented by Certified Wealth Management Investment. I am Kurt Baker, a certified financial planner professional. I'm located in Princeton, New Jersey, and I can be reached our website, which is www.cwmi.net.us, or you can call me directly at 609-716-4700. This week, we're very pleased to have with us Fiona Van Dyck, who she strives to offer clients exceptional legal representation and allay any fears that they may have in hiring an attorney. She works one-on-one with her clients to provide adept legal services that are responsive, competitive, and effective, taking the time to get to know each client and understand their personal situation and the goals they endeavor to achieve. The potential solutions in each case are so immense, yet Fiona takes pride in ensuring she meets the individual needs and concerns of all her clients by personalizing the meetings and documents. She has been chosen by the New Jersey Attorney General's office to instruct their attorneys on the topics of estate planning, estate administration, and elder law as part of their continuing legal education program, and frequently presents seminars concerning estate planning and elder law, including Medicaid and VA aid and attendance benefits. She has a Juris Doctorate from Rutgers University School of Law and a Master's of Law from University of London. She is an accredited Veterans Administration attorney and a member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, Wealth Counsel, and Elder Counsel. When she's not in the office, Fiona is an avid runner and volunteers her time with noteworthy community organizations, including the Princeton Senior Resource Center, a local nonprofit organization dedicated to bettering the lives of seniors in the community, where she is a member of the Board of Trustees. Fiona, I appreciate you taking time to come in and talk to us a little bit about kind of the situation. I think one thing I've noticed, at least as a planner, interestingly enough, people are having a little bit of time to think about things a little bit, right? And given that they're staying at home, they have a little more time to do some of those things maybe normally they complain they don't really have time to do. And I think one of the things I believe is very important is this is a great time to kind of, look at, your estate planning documents and look at things that maybe you need to do as far as structuring about that. And I know we've been in the news, so there's been a lot about, the elder care facilities and things like that. So I think a lot of this is coming to the kind of the top of people's minds a little bit. I mean, what have you been seeing that people are kind of thinking about now and addressing while we have a little bit of time to maybe work on this stuff?
Well, you're absolutely right. People have been very interested in planning of late. So what started when the crisis started with COVID, we had a lot of calls from people who didn't have documents, and a lot of people who were on the front lines. So emergency room physicians, nurses, who were dealing with patients every day who had the coronavirus, and realized that they didn't have documents in place. So we did a lot for people in March who were really scared for a lot of reasons, and sort of facing what was out there and realizing that they hadn't done any planning at all, or the planning that they had done was 30 years old and absolutely not applicable to their circumstances at the time. So we jumped in to make sure that we got those people their documents in place. So after March, so this past month, April, and continuing into May, we have exactly what you're describing. So a lot of people who have been sitting down and thinking, well, who aren't on the front lines necessarily, right? But have been thinking, well, we haven't actually done anything. And the crisis sort of brought up the lack of estate planning that people had done. And we've been quite busy with families, with individuals who want to make sure that they get the planning done and who do have the time. They've been sitting and thinking about what they want to do and have the time to do it. So this crisis has really come to the forefront for a lot of people that they haven't done their planning, or it needs to be updated.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing. It's like one of those like near-death experiences, right? You're like, oh my goodness, wow. What if something really had happened? I wasn't really as ready as I thought I was.
Yeah, exactly.
And now now you're like, oh wow, maybe I better relook at everything, whether it's the insurance
Mhm.
on your house, or whether do I have enough assets set aside? Do I have all my beneficiaries set up? Do I have my documents in place? I mean, there's just so many things that, um, whenever somebody goes through an experience where somebody passes, especially, I think a lot of people wake up to that fact, right? Now we're in one of those
Yeah.
situations where, oh my goodness, right? It's kind of a close call.
Exactly. I mean, we often get a lot of calls from people to schedule an appointment to talk about estate planning after there has been a death in their family. That it's they face their own mortality to a certain extent and realize that their their plan is not where they want it to be, or they've just come from handling the estate of another family member and realized that it was actually pretty difficult because they hadn't done the planning, because it wasn't really where it needed to be. So we get calls from people like that, throughout the year. But this crisis has really brought people into the office because they are sitting and watching the news and seeing what's happening out there and becoming very concerned that their plans aren't up to place. Um, Especially when you think about what estate planning is, which isn't just your will for what happens, after you're gone, but also the healthcare documents, making sure that you have named somebody to make healthcare decisions for you if you can't make them for yourself. A living will that's going to give somebody instructions on what you would want at the end of life if really the only thing keeping you going were the machines. And then also that HIPAA authorization to let the doctors know who they can talk to. Is it just your spouse? Is it your spouse and your kids? And with that HIPAA authorization, I always tell people if they have that close family member or friend who is a physician, that's a great document to name that person. It's not putting them into a position of making decisions for you, but it's allowing them to talk to your physicians. And Kurt, I've had so many doctors in my office, especially of late, and I ask each and every one of them to confirm that they talk to each other differently than they talk to us, we mere mortals. And they have all confirmed that they do. And of course they do. They come at it from a different perspective. They have a much deeper understanding of what's going on. So making sure you have those disability documents in place. And that, of course, that financial power of attorney to let somebody handle the business aspects of your life, if you can, are incredibly important.
So
So we need
are
to
there
get
any
those.
changes maybe we should think about? I mean, some of the things you hear about, and I don't know if you've experienced this personally or not. I haven't personally, but like if somebody's not doing well, right? They're not actually allowing family members to even like come in, right, to see them and things like that. So I would think that this really makes it's even more important, right? Because now you may not even be able to go into the hospital. You may not be able to go into the facility where
Yeah.
your loved one resides. So you can't even like kind of talk to people that are typically around them and at least help them or guide them on what that particular person may want and how they might want to be cared for. And I think this comes up a lot in kind of the elder care facilities, right? Or maybe even the hospital,
Yeah.
things like that. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about some of these we've been hearing about as far as how this is being handled?
In the assisted livings and in the nursing homes.
Right,
Well,
right.
what we've been doing a lot of, not necessarily in the assisted livings and the nursing homes, but we don't really have people coming into the office for meetings anymore.
Hmm.
So everything's being really done via Zoom. So our meetings are taking place via Zoom. With people in the assisted livings and the nursing homes, we have been in some assisted livings still working with our clients. So we meet with them via Zoom or FaceTime, and they have, if they're well, they can come outside and we can meet them outside. We've been reviewing documents on Zoom too. So I'm getting really, really good at Zoom. And Kurt, you know
So
me.
how are people responding to that? I know, I mean, technology's, I'm okay with technology, but I've never been forced to quite use it as much as I have been in the last several weeks, especially. There was that
Yeah.
kind of this transition period I think we all went through, and then all of a sudden we said, hey, we got to start still operating, right? And we all kind of like locked into different ways we're doing it. And then we got used to it. Now we're like, wow, this is not so bad, but it's different, right? So every time you're talking to somebody, I mean, what have you noticed as far as your clients go, and maybe even on your personal experiences, right? I mean, it's now we have to do it. Now we're kind of getting comfortable with it a little bit, right?
I'm much more comfortable with it than I was.
Right.
So I'm still a people person. I still like to have that that meeting with somebody where they come into my conference room and I can sit and have a nice cup of coffee or a nice cup of tea with them and talk about what their concerns are. But I've had to Zoom. So I've gotten much better at just connecting with people through the computer, which is a bit odd and a little bit different. I'm looking forward to going back to in-person meetings and not Zooming quite as much. But I think everybody is Zooming in their world or doing Microsoft team meetings or something. And I don't know, how's it been for you?
I think it's worked out well. Now that we've kind of gotten used to it, it's okay. But I agree with you 100%. I still personally prefer to be one-on-one with people, and you still have that.
Yeah.
We're still human beings, so I like to be around people. But this is something that I've become more comfortable with, and I think people on the other end are becoming more comfortable with it, right? So it's a lot of this is like, I've never done this before. What do I do? And once they've done it once, then you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And once
Yeah.
you've done it a couple times, you're like, oh, this is no big deal. It's not much different than making a phone call or sending an email. It's just in a different interface. So once you kind of work your way around it once or twice, all of these systems are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're getting used to it. But yeah, no, we're coming up on a break here real quick. But yeah, we definitely want to talk a little bit more about like how we're managing the pandemic and things that we can do while we have a little bit of downtime as far as our overall planning goes. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I'm Kurt Baker here with Fiona Van Dyck, Van Dyck Law. And we were talking right before the break. We were talking a little bit of how we're all kind of getting used to using these video conferencing systems like Microsoft Teams and Zoom and Google Hangouts, etc. There's a bunch of them out there. And I think we're getting more used to that. Although you and I both agree that I still like to meet people in person. This is nice,
Yeah.
but it's a great way to do it now. And I think we're all getting a little bit better at it, which is good. So in certain circumstances, I think this works fine. But I still think we're all going to be very excited to get back and being able to meet with our clients and meet with other of our comrades, so to speak, and kind of get to see each other again. So how are you operating? Since you're a pretty critical business as far as people need to do their estate plan and people need to maintain their legal structure, of course. And so how are you running your office in general, given the change in the landscape that we have right now?
Yeah. So there are about 4 of us that are coming into the office regularly, and we all work in our own little silos. So we have to keep, we're keeping our appropriate social distance from each other. We work in our offices. It's one of those things where we'll say, I'm going for coffee now. So I'm broaching into the common space.
So you put up a little bat signal to indicate what you're doing next.
Yeah.
a little flare or something that goes up.
And it is hard because we'll want to look at the same document or something, and then we'll be close together. Like, stop! You're encroaching on my social distance. But for clients, as I said, people are still calling the office regularly. We're really quite busy. That initial meeting that we have with people, as I said, we're doing it via Zoom, and we do have a lot of clients who are older and not as technologically savvy as what are our kids? They are called tech natives or something. They're native speakers of technology, right? They can do all of this without even thinking about it. But a lot of my clients are older, so we are working with them to teach them how to Zoom. So for people who haven't Zoomed before, somebody in my office will have a telephone call with their computer on and sort of take them through it step by step so that they're up and ready to go. We do that like the day before their meeting. So they feel really comfortable with the technology by the time I meet with them. And then when we're doing documents, and this is something I've actually been liking, I share my screen. So we'll prepare the documents. And then our second meeting will be another Zoom meeting. And I'll share the documents on the computer so that they can see the documents. We'll go through the documents, document by document, just like they would in the conference room if we were sitting and going through the documents together. There we'd be looking at the paper documents, and here we're looking together at the computer screen. Any changes that they want to make, I'll take the documents back and make those changes. But we are meeting people for signings in the office, but they're very different. So it's like a 10-minute meeting. We're lucky that people can come into our office without even touching a doorknob, right? So you can, hit the button by the front doors to the office building, and they'll open for you. You can walk into our office, walk into the conference room, and we've been laying out the documents that people have already reviewed, and then we are witnessing and notarizing them. The notary and the witnesses are watching them from our 10-foot distance with our masks on. Clients sign the documents. We step in and they step away, and one at a time we step in and sign as witnesses and notaries. They go back to their car. While we then gather the documents, scan them, copy them, staple them, put them in their binder, and then we walk the documents out to the car with our Clorox wipe down their binder and put it on the hood of their car. And then we step away and they take it out of their car and get their documents. But so we've been, I think these documents can be really critical for people. So we have been open to make sure that we're there for our clients, and making sure that we are doing for them what they need. And people are so right now anxious generally. Everybody's anxious. And if this is one of those things that people are feeling very anxious and concerned about, to know that they can come in, they can get it taken care of. That that little voice in their head's like, this isn't up to date, this isn't, I don't have this document, that they can get it up to date, they can get it done. We've got a mechanism to do it, and to do it very safely. I think if I can take that one concern away from people, that makes me feel better in this crazy world. One of the things that we were doing and that we're still doing out there is free medical directives for people who are on the front lines. So, and really the people that I'm thinking about there, and that my office has been thinking about, are not necessarily the people who really even know what documents they need. So the people who work in the hospitals, not necessarily the doctors and nurses, but the orderlies, the techs, the janitors in the hospital that are still around this virus, don't have the documents. So we've been, doing those without charge. Also for people who work in the grocery stores. They're those frontline people that need to have those documents and don't even, and aren't really sure where to get them. So we've put word out to the hospital, the first responders, the grocery stores, that we're happy to do that for their people.
No, I think that's great. I mean, actually, I have a nephew and a niece that both work in a grocery store, and it's I think they said they're like 80% above their goal last month. I mean, it's just,
yeah,
and they're under a lot of stress. I mean, even if everybody was like perfectly nice to them, but every once in a while you get people who are, obviously everybody's a little bit agitated, and so they're really under a lot of stress. I mean, I think sometimes we don't appreciate the people that are, delivering food to us or doing the takeout and all these other things. And I think it's really great that you guys are stepping up and helping them out a little bit, because they're under a lot of pressure. I just know that personally, that the public doesn't necessarily understand. We kind of forget that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes for a lot of this stuff to appear on the shelves and out in that we have been taken for granted for a long time. So the medical directives,
absolutely.
I mean, the medical directive is fantastic. So are there any other areas of focus? I mean, I'm thinking about my most common thing that I run across when I get a client referred to me is, as you point out, they either have no documents or the stuff is way out of date. So probably what people should be doing if they have a little time at home, I would think, is just go find this stuff, right? And if it looks like maybe you need to get it updated, I think it'd be a great time to just sit down and, I mean, can they I mean, do they typically, I'm assuming they can like send it to you for review, and then you go over it, and then you make a suggestion. And this is just a fantastic time, because I know you found this out, because I found out the same thing, is that there's always something that could probably be tweaked for almost everybody, it seems like, because things change in our lives, right? And it's amazing how the documents you did yesterday were really done 10 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, we just updated those. Right?
Yeah.
I've done the same thing. I'm like, it's been a long time.
Yeah. I was just talking to some clients yesterday via Zoom, and their documents had been done literally 30 years before, when their daughter was born. Right? They wanted to make sure they had a guardian named for her. And their life circumstances had completely changed. But one of the things that we often see are people that do come in with the documents that are very old, and that's fine. Let's get them updated. Now's the time. And our documents need to change with us. So especially we move sort of from basic estate planning into more elder law. We want to make sure that the documents potentially give the people that we love, including our spouses, the ability to do long-term care planning for us, even if we don't do it ourselves. So many people are concerned about long-term care because of the costs associated with it, right? So in this area of New Jersey, nursing homes can be as much as $16,000 a month. And assisted livings, once you start needing care, like $7,500 a month to $10,000 a month. That's a lot of money. $120,000 a year to $160,000 a year on long-term care costs. And many people are under the impression that Medicare is going to cover those costs, and it doesn't. The only government program that's available to assist in paying with long-term care costs is Medicaid. And I don't know if you've noticed, but in New Jersey, we pay a lot more taxes than some other states. Have you noticed that?
Usually around this time of year, it really comes to a point.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of noticed it.
You're like, wow, yeah.
I often think. Yeah, we do. But I often think that this is one area where we get a bit more. So Medicaid, just kind of like Medicaid 101. So one, it's the only government program that assists in paying for long-term care costs. And in New Jersey, Medicaid will pay for skilled nursing homes. That's kind of across the board. But it will also pay for assisted living and some in-home care. So in that regard, we get a bit more. Every state is different. In Pennsylvania, for example, Medicaid in Pennsylvania will not pay for assisted livings. It will pay for some home care and nursing homes, but not assisted livings. So that's really something that is great in New Jersey, and that isn't in all states. But you want to make sure, if you're not doing the planning yourself, maybe protecting assets, because as you know, Medicaid is very asset limited, that you're giving your spouse the ability to do that. And in that regard, we really want to make sure that you have a very, very strong power of attorney, a durable power of attorney. And again, that's that document that says who can handle the business of your life. So as we get older, we want to make sure that that is a very strong document, and that we are allowing the people that we name as our agents to potentially gift assets in a structured way, and to talk to an elder law attorney before you make any of those gifts. But if it's not in there, if the power of attorney doesn't say that your agent can make gifts really in unlimited amounts, and can allow your agent to set up potentially an irrevocable trust, then they can't do it. They're not allowed to do it. And that's how we do the asset protection, to allow people to protect some assets, but still access Medicaid. For people who don't have that language in the power of attorney, we can still get it done typically. but it means we have to go to the court, and we have to have somebody who doesn't have capacity anymore. We have to have them declared incapacitated, and we have to ask a judge for permission to do that type of planning that could be taken care of with a paragraph in a power of attorney.
Oh, absolutely. This
Even
is very
between
important.
spouses, right?
I agree 100%. This is a really important area. Yeah, we're coming up on a quick break here, but I definitely want to finish this out because, planning for this is really important. Planning for long-term care and the different aspects of that, I think is really critical. Well, you're listening to Master Your Finances. We're going to be right back. Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but we were like running over a little bit. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finance. I'm Kurt Baker here with Fiona Van Dyck of Van Dyck Law, and we're talking about the effects that this the pandemic is kind of having on us all, and ways you can use this time really to help yourself and help your loved ones. And really part of that, it comes down to planning. I know Fiona and I are both on the same page with that. We do we really do the same thing, but a different corner of the same thing, right? Planning is really, really important from a legal perspective and a financial perspective, but all of it together. And before the break, we were talking a little bit about, Medicare, how it does not cover long-term care expenses like some people believe it does, but Medicaid does. And if we could just kind of go through that a little bit, I know one of the main aspects of that whole scenario, especially long-term care in general, is really the earlier you start to plan for this, the more likely you are to have a better outcome if and when a long-term care situation occurs. And as we are well aware of up in the Northeast, like New Jersey, this is a very expensive proposition, and there are lots of options to try to help yourself out. I'll just throw in my side of it. A lot of people think that, well, as soon as you need long-term care, you may have to go into a facility, but a lot of people will age in place, and you can do lots of things to allow your expenses to be paid, have people come into your home and help take care of you. And you need the legal structure in place to do that, as well as the financial structure. So do you want to address a little bit of like when they should start to address things like long-term care, and what are some of those best practices from your point of view?
Yeah, so a lot of people come in when they're in their 50s, their 60s to start planning for long-term care. And depending on really what their assets are, we can look at it both from a legal perspective, and then also work, Kurt, with somebody like you on the financial perspective of it. So what we often do from a legal perspective is, one, make sure that their estate plan is very, very solid. Sorry. That was my, yeah, when you're home, right? So what we do is make sure from that legal perspective that we have what is necessary in place, the strong power of attorney to allow somebody to handle those assets. But from that pre-planning perspective, often what we're doing is setting up an irrevocable trust and allowing people to move assets into that to give them protections. Right now, we have a 5-year look back. So any assets that you move over to an irrevocable trust, if you make an application for Medicaid in 5 years, they're not even going to be reported, right? So we can kind of do that pre-planning, as it were. We're healthy, we're not really thinking about needing Medicaid or long-term care, but maybe we set up that irrevocable trust. And one asset that's so easy typically to move in is a house, because you don't rely upon that for money coming in the door, right? It's there, it's a pretty easy asset to protect. And we also talk to people, if they can get it, long-term care insurance, right? And I know that's something that you're very involved with, and looking at not just necessarily the traditional long-term care products that people had before, where there was the premium that you would pay every year, and there's a chance of those premiums rising. One of the things that unfortunately I've seen more times than I care to think about is people who've let that insurance lapse because the premiums got too high, and then 3 years later they're in the nursing home or the assisted living. But there are other products that are available now where you can use your retirement account, use money that's in the brokerage account to sort of pre-fund your long-term care. And if you don't do the traditional insurance, if you didn't use it, you lost it. But with these newer products that are built, I think, on insurance policies or annuities, it's not, if you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't use it, you have a beneficiary who's going to then take what you didn't use.
Yeah, no, I agree. The planning is really important. I want to point out one thing that you kind of touched on a little bit. I want to make sure people understand this is if you have insurance and then long-term care for sure, but any insurance before you let it lapse for not
Yes.
being able to afford it, you always want to have somebody review it and make sure there are always options. Like you can reduce the face value. Oftentimes you can adjust the cash flow of it. Sometimes you can pay up the insurance, but there's always options that are available. With most policies, especially as old long-term care insurance policies, most of them are being maintained at really the insurance company's cost. So they tend to be really, really good deals. If somebody has had them for 10 or more years, it's probably a very inexpensive policy for the benefit. So if you're running into issues with paying it, you want to have somebody review it. Don't just automatically just stop paying it. Just make sure somebody reviews it, because there's a lot of options out there that might be much more beneficial for you. And I think you pointed this out a little bit, is a lot of this, people are afraid of it. They think it's just way too expensive, but it's actually, you can budget for it and you can actually create whatever is applicable for your particular situation. So it is very, as you point out, there's many, many options out there now. And there's almost always a realistic solution that's affordable for everybody. It's really something that's solvable.
Well, I think when somebody's thinking about doing that long-term care planning, if they're healthy, it's absolutely something that can be a great part of the plan and give them so many more options, because the sooner you think about it and you do the planning, the more options that you have. If you wait until you're in the, your loved one is in the nursing home, is in the assisted living, your options have become much more limited. But the sooner you do the planning and think about it, the more options that you have. With everything, the sooner you do it, the more options you have. And this is one of those areas where it's so important to really think about that. And often what we're doing, it's that long-term care insurance, if it works for people, alongside the legal documents, alongside making sure that from a legal standpoint you have those documents in place to protect some assets alongside the insurance. A lot of people will go that route to make sure that they're absolutely going to be covered. But for a lot of people, it will be sometimes one or the other, but I think it has to be a part of people's estate planning, especially as we get older, to talk to clients about, well, if you needed to go into an assisted living, if you wanted to get the home health care, how are you going to afford it, and what are the costs involved?
And I think this is one of the areas where oftentimes it's valuable to get like a kind of a multi-generational buy-in to this, so to speak, because when we get older, I think it's really important for us to really, if we have children, for them to understand what we want, and for the children to be able to help. So in some cases, there's kind of a win-win scenario that can be set up to make sure that older people are getting, whatever they are looking for as far as how they want to age, right? Do they want to age in place? What type of facility they want to go into, and how is it going to be paid for, right? And a lot of times the children, like multi-generations, are involved in this process, right? And I think it's really important just from estate planning in general, but especially like kind of long-term care, right? Because you don't want to overwhelm the children, but sometimes that'll happen, right? You have a work, oh, well, my daughter or my son's going to take care of me and they'll be fine with that. Well, maybe they won't be fine with that because they can't. They have a job, they have children, they have other obligations. And often, like, parents will forget that they have their own families and they have their own stresses and they have their own things they need to work with. And to all of a sudden expect them, which might be providing a dinner once a week, to all of a sudden I'm taking full care of my my parents. That's a lot. That's a lot to expect from them. And I think the sooner you kind of have these conversations about how that all is going to work and how you're going to fund it if necessary, it just takes a lot of that stress away. And now that we kind of have a little bit of time to think about that and more time to talk to our loved ones, maybe this is a good time to have some of those conversations, right?
Yeah. And I think you're exactly right. in today's world where, so many people are working and there's so much going on in families, not only can you not assume that your family's able to step in and care for you, but also the medical needs might not be able to be met. But also, do you want, I always say to people, do you want your child to be in that role as your nurse? Maybe not. Do you want your spouse to be the person who's doing those things for you? Or how would you afford a home health aide? And unfortunately, I had a client about a month ago. We were talking about long-term care insurance, and she would never be able to, because of some medical issues. It wasn't something that she would then be available to her. And she told me that her a financial advisor that she had been working with, when she brought up long-term care insurance to him about 15 years before, his response to her was, "Well, why would you want that? You don't want to go to a nursing home, do you?" And my
Oh, my
mouth
word.
fell open, because
Oh, no.
that's exactly why you have it, so you don't have to go to the nursing home,
Oh,
so
my
that you can
word.
bring
Oh, my
in
word. My word.
people into your home to take care of you, or for the assisted living. And I just thought, is that his idea of it? Or I hear people, I've heard people say to me, and I know they've said it to my clients, they've told me that, you don't really need that insurance. You don't really need to plan for long-term care legally, or fight with some sort of long-term care insurance, because people are only in the nursing home for 2 years. Oh, that's absolutely not the case. And, when we're thinking about skilled nursing facilities, people now go to skilled nursing facilities when they're very, very ill. So the time that people spend in skilled nursing is shorter. But people now are going to assisted livings, and they've really taken on a lot of the roles that nursing homes used to play. And unless people need really intensive medical care or invasive treatments, people are staying in the assisted livings, right? A lot of them have a very high level of care that they can provide. And especially when we're thinking about dementia diagnosis or an Alzheimer's diagnosis, people aren't there for 2 years. People are there for 10 years, 15 years, and that's expensive. So, it's something you absolutely need to think about. And when clients come in and they tell me that an advisor had told them that it's only 2 years, and that why would you want that type of insurance? Because you don't want to go. Do you want to go to a nursing home? Well, no, nobody comes in and says, you know what my goal is? I want to go to a nursing home. No, you don't want to. Nobody wants to live in a nurse. It's not, you're not a 25-year-olds don't think, wow, you know what I want to be doing when I'm 80? I want to be in a nursing home. I don't think so, right? You want to stay home as long as you can, or you want to live in that home-like environment. But nursing homes absolutely have a place for people who really need that level of care.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm embarrassed if that person is part of our industry, because they shouldn't be part of our industry. That is just the wrong advice. But yeah, we're going to talk more about this in just a few minutes. We're coming up on a break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We'll be right back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I'm Kurt Baker here with Fiona Van Dyck of Van Dyck Law. And we've been talking really about something that's very important that often people don't really address early enough sometimes, but it is really kind of important, which is, how are you going to address as we age, taking care of yourself or your parents, whatever the case may be? Often we talk about that as long-term care, but that's really just about, how do you want to age and how are you going to fund it, whether that's staying at home, whether that's moving into, like a continuing care facility and things like that. There's lots and lots of options out there. One is like, what do you want? And two is, how are you going to plan for it? And one of the things you kind of brought up in the last thing is that we talked a little bit about how sometimes people rely on family members. And you mentioned, well, would you really want to have your son or daughter take care of you? And I've had some people that I've talked to that once we set it up so that they could fund the care, the parent that was being taken care of goes, I got my daughter back, right? Because she was no longer coming over to like change the sheets on the bed and cook the meals. She was coming over to see her mother. It was more
Yes.
about, I'm coming over to chat with my mom about her day, not to do all the errands around the house for 8 hours. So
Exactly.
The relationship actually significantly improved. And one of the comments was, and this person ended up passing away, one of the comments was, I was so glad that we got to develop that relationship, and I wasn't her full-time caregiver near the end of her life. I could actually be her daughter, which I thought was really powerful, as far as how you need to make sure that you're set up correctly so that you can still have a family life and still maintain, all the structure you need in order to live the way you want to live and still have a relationship with your children, right? And so forth.
Yeah, wow, that's so true. That, if you're the home health aide, you're not really the family member at that time, and you often want your family member to be there to give you the love and comfort of a family member, and not necessarily doing all of the things that need to be done. That if you were properly set up, if you had the funds set aside to do it, that you would have a home health aide, somebody who's doing that in a professional category, to let your family be your family.
Yes, because
That's
they're
really
not all
powerful.
stressed out,
That,
right? You can't go from vacuuming
yeah,
the living room to, oh, let's sit and chat now. Oh, I'm tired. I want to go home, right?
yeah,
So, um, I think it's important. So you kind of have to take a little bit of a step, and that's why I think a lot of these conversations, it's really, you have to really think about it in a realistic way, about what it really means, as far as the obligations people are setting themselves up for, because you want that flexibility, I think, and you want to maintain that quality of life, and that's kind of really what it's all about, is really living the way that everybody wants to live, and just finding a way to structure it. Because usually you can find a way to structure it as long as you understand what your goals are. That's what I found, at
yeah,
least. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
I agree. That's a good point.
now that we got our facilities in place, the biggie is, right. So we want to make sure we're planning for long-term care, especially nowadays, where I think this has come to light a little bit, right? Where sometimes people need to go into facilities. We want to take care of our parents. So anything else that you're seeing going on now as far as planning goes? I know some updating their docs is really important, right? Obviously taking care of, everybody is good, making sure we're getting ready to go, whatever that may be, the long-term care facilities if necessary. But aging in place, I know, is the most popular way people like to age, right? So
Yeah,
what else are you guys seeing over there as far as what people are doing?
in the what people are doing in the estate planning
Sure.
and
Yep.
elder law world.
Hmm.
I'll tell you something that I like a lot is what I call a beneficiary protection trust. So, a lot of people, I know I am, probably are concerned about, your children and the inheritance that they receive from you. So, there are different ways that you can leave your beneficiaries their inheritance. So one is what we call an outright distribution, where, I pass on and my beneficiaries receive a check from my estate for, their 50% share, 25% share, whatever it is they're receiving. That's never something that's good for a young beneficiary, because, you never want to give a 20-year-old $1 million, because their frontal cortexes are just like jelly still, and they can't think past their next meal.
They might have a new
And,
McLaren in the front yard, in the parking lot in the front. Right?
uh, uh, yeah, exactly. It's right. So they're at the
No
Range
money.
Rover dealership to get the vehicle to transport their friends, and then they're heading to the Porsche dealership, and
Not
15 of
good.
their best friends are on a Caribbean island with them.
Hmm.
So one of the things that people often do is then what we call stagger the distribution. So if you're 25, you're going to get a portion of your inheritance. At 30, you're going to get more of your inheritance, and maybe at 35, you get it all. And until 35, it's held in trust. It's available. Somebody else is typically in charge of the money. But at these ages, the money's going to come out of trust. But a different way, that I really like to see, of course, it all depends on the family and their views, but is to actually leave the inheritance in a lifetime trust for a beneficiary. And often people think, well, that's just saying to them that I don't trust them. And that's absolutely not the case. It's not that you don't trust them, it's that you don't trust the other, the rest of the world. So it's a way of saying to them, listen, I'm going to leave you your inheritance in trust for the rest of your life. And if you think about it, the person who controls and manages that trust is called the trustee. That's the person who sort of has the key to unlock the trust and bring the money out and determine how that money is going to be managed. But instead of saying at 35, you get all of the money in the trust, you say at 35, you become the trustee. So you're in control of your pot of money, and it's accessible to you, but it's not accessible to the outside world. So it's a way of giving some protection from what I call creditors and predators. So predators are the in-laws that we used to like, but now maybe we don't like them as much as we did. There's a divorce or something happening. And then creditors, right? So that's the lawsuits, bankruptcies, things of that nature, right? You're driving on 95 and rear end and cause an accident with the head neurosurgeon from the University of Pennsylvania, and that doctor can never work again. Maybe you don't have that umbrella policy to cover these enormous damages. So it's a way of making sure that those outsiders, those third parties that we don't trust as much, the assets in that type of beneficiary protection trust aren't available to those third parties. They're only available to your beneficiary, to your child or your loved one. And then you set the default. What's going to happen to the money in the trust if your child dies? 90 years old, leaves 3 children. Well, the default is usually, if you've got 3 children, it's going to go equally amongst those 3 kids. But you can also give that beneficiary, your child, the chance to mix that up. So you can say in the trust, listen, this is what I've put, but if you don't like it, you can change it. And you can say you can change it and leave it to anybody in the world you want, any charity, any person you want. You can leave it to your next door neighbor's schnauzer if you want. And that's really, when you say that, you're saying, listen, I'm putting you in charge of the money and I'm allowing you to control the money, what happens to the money after you're gone. So really, it's as if you had the money in your own pocket, except it's protected from those creditors and predators.
How does this apply to spouses throughout their life? I mean, you're talking about a young
with
person.
spouses,
Yeah. If they get married and then
so
they get divorced, they
that's
get married,
often something
divorced, whatever.
Right. So for spouses, what we do is something a little bit different. So some people want to leave their spouse's money outright. Absolutely fine. But if you want to protect from a second marriage, so, from bubbles can be man or woman, bubbles is across the board. But if
Right.
you want to protect from bubbles coming in, you would leave your money to your, the spouse who survives you in trust.
Okay. I guess what I meant
the
is
money's there because everybody.
I meant the first trust you're talking about. I guess I want to make sure I was clear. The lifetime
you would
trust for beneficiaries. Yeah.
Yes, it would be the same. That's often why I was really talking about,
Okay.
your children, grandchildren. But you can also leave your money to your spouse in trust to protect from second marriages and also credit the predators, bubbles the predator, or creditors also.
Okay, maybe I wasn't clear. I guess
So we do that.
If I receive if I'm a beneficiary of this trust, right? I'm a young person. I'm in my 20s, and I'm going to become the trustee at 35. Yep. And let's say I get married, right? And I have this trust where I'm the beneficiary and now I'm the trustee. How does it impact like the marital assets? If I were to get married at 35, as an example, this trust, how does that fit into? Is it just part of the marital assets at that point?
Yeah, they're not.
I'm the beneficiary?
No, they're absolutely not marital assets.
There you go.
Because that person you're marrying is not a beneficiary of the trust. So that's how we give them the protection, because they're never going to become marital assets
as well. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Absolutely.
That's what I thought. I want to clarify that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yes.
I know you're.
Yeah. That's why I said it's a way we give the protection from the predators.
Right, so you don't know. Unfortunately, roughly whatever, I don't know what the number is now, but about half of marriages end in divorce. So if you're leaving substantial assets and you're concerned, you don't even know, who your child or children might get married to. You have no idea what their whole, lifetime situations end up being, and you don't want those assets to go to somebody that you're never going to meet. Maybe, at least you want to protect your child or children. This is one way to do that, to kind of keep that off to the side a little bit, right? So they can receive the benefit of it, but it's not considered an asset if they were to get married at some point, right? Because it's in a trust.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, as I said, you can say to your child or the beneficiary of the trust, you can leave this money to whomever you want.
Right.
Or you can say, you can only leave the money to my descendants.
Mm-hmm.
So the money has to go to your children or your grandchildren. It's going to go down the bloodline. We typically call that protecting the bloodline. So you can either say, I want to protect the bloodline. I want this money to stay in the family. I don't want it to go to a spouse or anybody else. Or you can say, listen, I want you to use this money and leave this money to whomever you want.
Well,
So
that's
you get
fantastic.
to choose.
You get to choose. Well, Fiona, this has been amazing. Time has just flown by. Any final thoughts about our current situation, recommendations to people out there before we wrap up?
Stay well. Stay safe, right?
Absolutely. Well, you've been listening to Master Your Finance. I'm here with Fiona Van Dyck. And if you want to listen to this podcast and all of our podcasts, you can go to masteryourfinances.us. And remember, together we can master your finances so you can enjoy financial peace of mind.